Welcome, everyone. Today's story is a captivating tale of wealth, power, heartbreak, and an unexpected love that changed the life of a billionaire who thought he needed no one. The last thing anyone expected to see on a rainy Thursday morning in Manhattan was Alexander Hayes standing completely still. People moved when Alexander Hayes entered a room. Executives lowered their voices. Lawyers chose their words carefully. Competitors changed strategies overnight. At 38, he was the youngest billionaire CEO in New York's financial district and the most feared businessman in the city. But that morning, Alexander wasn't moving. He stood in the lobby of Hayes Global, staring at a young woman kneeling on the marble floor. Not because she was frightened, not because she had dropped something important, but because she was helping an elderly janitor gather hundreds of scattered documents while dozens of highly paid executives walked past without stopping. For a brief moment, the entire lobby seemed frozen. The woman smiled warmly at the embarrassed old man. "Don't worry," she said. "We'll have everything picked up before anyone notices." Alexander watched as she carefully organized every page into neat stacks. Something about her irritated him immediately. Maybe it was the way she acted, as though she had all the time in the world. Maybe it was the way she seemed completely unaffected by the pressure surrounding her. Or maybe it was because she looked genuinely happy. And Alexander Hayes hated happy people. Because happiness was temporary. Success was permanent. At least that was what he had spent the last 15 years convincing himself. The elevator doors opened behind him. "Mr. Hayes," his assistant asked nervously. Alexander blinked and continued walking. "Who is she?" His assistant looked confused. "The woman helping the janitor." "Oh, that's Charlotte Bennett. She started 3 weeks ago in administrative operations." Alexander nodded once. Then he entered the elevator. But for reasons he couldn't explain, he remembered her name. Charlotte Bennett. The woman who smiled too much. The woman who clearly didn't understand how the real world worked. Or so he thought. 3 hours later, Charlotte sat quietly at her desk reviewing employee schedules when a shadow appeared beside her. She looked up and nearly dropped her coffee. Standing in front of her was the man every employee in the company feared. Alexander Hayes. In person. Without warning. Without witnesses. Without his security team. The office around them instantly became silent. Charlotte stood. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." Alexander studied her face. No panic. No desperate attempt to impress him. No obvious fear. "Interesting. Come with me." Every employee nearby looked as though they had just witnessed a death sentence. Charlotte swallowed. "May I ask why?" Alexander's eyes narrowed. Nobody asked him questions. Nobody. Yet somehow this woman had done it in under 10 seconds. "You may." She waited. Alexander stared back. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Finally Charlotte sighed. "Then why?" For the first time in months, Alexander almost smiled. Almost. "Because I need someone to organize a disaster." 20 minutes later Charlotte entered the executive conference floor, a place most employees never saw. The room looked like a battlefield. Documents covered every surface. Acquisition reports, legal filings, financial projections. 3 departments had spent 6 weeks preparing a merger presentation and somehow managed to create complete chaos. Alexander crossed his arms. "Fix it." Charlotte looked around. Then back at him. "That's all. That's all." She nodded. "Okay. No complaints. No excuses. No dramatic speech. Just okay." 4 hours later, she walked into Alexander's office carrying 3 neatly organized binders. The entire merger project had been sorted, indexed, color-coded, and summarized. Alexander reviewed the materials. Everything was flawless. Impossible. "Who helped you?" Charlotte frowned. "No one." "That's 6 weeks of work." "No. That's 6 weeks of confusion." Alexander looked up slowly. Nobody spoke to him that way. Nobody. Yet Charlotte seemed completely unaware she was talking to one of the most powerful men in America. Or perhaps she simply didn't care. For reasons he couldn't explain, that possibility bothered him far more. As the weeks passed, Alexander found excuses to assign Charlotte more projects. Officially, it was because she was efficient. Unofficially, he was curious. Because Charlotte Bennett didn't behave like everyone else. She treated billionaires and interns exactly the same. She remembered birthdays. She brought coffee to overworked employees. She somehow knew the names of security guards, receptionists, maintenance workers, and executives alike. And wherever she went, people smiled. Alexander couldn't understand it. Power created obedience. Money created influence. Fear created results. Those were facts. Yet Charlotte accomplished things through kindness that entire management teams failed to achieve. One evening, long after everyone else had gone home, Alexander noticed a light still on in the office. Charlotte was sitting alone, working. He approached quietly. "You should go home." She looked up and smiled. "Probably. Then why aren't you?" Charlotte hesitated. For the first time since meeting her, the smile faded slightly. "My mother's in the hospital." Alexander paused. The answer surprised him. "What's wrong?" Charlotte looked down. "Cancer." The room became silent. And for the first time, Alexander saw something behind her constant optimism. Pain. Real pain. The kind no amount of kindness could erase. What Charlotte didn't know was that her answer had just awakened a part of Alexander Hayes he had buried years ago. A part connected to a tragedy he never spoke about. A tragedy that had transformed him into the cold, ruthless man the city feared. And when Charlotte accidentally uncovered that secret days later, everything between them would change forever. Alexander Hayes had spent 15 years making sure nobody knew the truth. The world believed he was cold because he was ambitious, ruthless because he was brilliant, detached because success demanded sacrifice. The truth was much uglier. Years ago, before the billions, before magazine covers and private jets, before becoming one of the most powerful CEOs in America, Alexander had been a completely different man. And Charlotte Bennett was about to discover that secret by accident. 3 days after their conversation about her mother, Charlotte was working late organizing archived company records. The executive floor was nearly empty. Most employees had already gone home. The silence made it easier to focus, until she noticed an unlocked storage room connected to Alexander's private office. Curious, she stepped inside. Shelves filled with old files surrounded her. She searched for a specific acquisition report, but accidentally knocked over a small box hidden behind several binders. The box fell. Photographs scattered across the floor. Charlotte immediately bent down to gather them. Then she froze. Every picture showed Alexander, but not the Alexander everyone knew. This man was smiling, laughing, holding hands with a young woman, standing beside a little girl with bright blue eyes. A family. Charlotte stared at the photographs. Confused. The powerful CEO had never been publicly linked to anyone serious. According to every business article ever written about him, Alexander Hayes lived only for work. Then who were these people? Before she could wonder further, a voice behind her shattered the silence. "What are you doing?" Charlotte turned. Alexander stood in the doorway. His expression instantly darkened when he saw the photographs. For a moment, genuine panic flashed across his face. Then it disappeared, replaced by ice. "I'm sorry," Charlotte said quickly. The box fell. Alexander crossed the room and took the photographs from her hands. His jaw tightened. "Leave!" The single word carried enough force to stop most people immediately. But Charlotte noticed something beneath the anger. Pain. Raw pain. "Alexander." "I said leave." She hesitated, then quietly nodded. As she walked away, she glanced back once. The feared billionaire wasn't looking at her. He was staring at one of the photographs. And for the first time since meeting him, he looked completely broken. The next morning Charlotte discovered she had been reassigned. No more executive projects. No more direct contact with Alexander. No explanation. Everyone assumed she had made some terrible mistake. Charlotte tried to convince herself she didn't care. But she did. Far more than she wanted to admit. Because somewhere along the way, the intimidating CEO had stopped being just her boss. She had started seeing the lonely man hiding behind the reputation. And now he had pushed her away. The following weeks were uncomfortable. Alexander avoided her completely. Meetings ended before she arrived. Emails were routed through assistants. Whenever they accidentally crossed paths, he looked the other direction. Charlotte hated it. Not because she missed the special assignments. Because she missed him. One evening she visited her mother at the hospital. The treatments had become harder. The doctors were optimistic, but recovery would take time. Charlotte sat beside the bed holding her mother's hand. "You look sad," her mother said softly. Charlotte smiled weakly. "I'm fine." "Charlotte!" Mothers always knew. Especially this mother. After a long silence, Charlotte sighed. "There's someone." Her mother immediately grinned. "A man." Charlotte laughed. "It's not like that." "Then why are your cheeks turning red?" Charlotte rolled her eyes. "He's impossible." "The interesting ones usually are." Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "What happened?" Charlotte stared toward the window. "He pushes everyone away." "And yet you're still thinking about him." Charlotte didn't answer. Because the answer was obvious. The next day, everything changed. At exactly 9:17 a.m., Hayes Global stocks suddenly dropped 7%. By noon, financial media outlets were reporting rumors of fraud. By 3 o'clock, investors were panicking. Someone had leaked confidential information. The board demanded answers. Executives blamed each other. Lawyers filled conference rooms. The entire company entered crisis mode. Alexander worked non-stop for 22 hours. By the second day, he looked exhausted. By the third day, he looked dangerous. The pressure was enormous. Billions of dollars were at risk. Then another disaster struck. A major investor scheduled an emergency meeting. If Alexander failed to secure their support, the company could lose everything. The presentation needed to be flawless. Unfortunately, nobody could locate several critical files. Departments scrambled. Managers argued. Time disappeared. Finally, someone suggested the obvious solution. Charlotte Bennett. Reluctantly, Alexander agreed. An hour later, she entered the executive conference room. For the first time in weeks, their eyes met. The tension was immediate. Neither spoke. Charlotte simply reviewed the situation. Then she got to work. For 12 straight hours, she organized reports, coordinated departments, corrected inconsistencies, and rebuilt the presentation from scratch. By midnight, the project was finished. Perfect. Exactly like before. Alexander watched her quietly. The same question returned. How did she do it? Not the work. The people. Every employee around her seemed calmer, more focused, more confident, as if her presence alone made impossible situations manageable. When the final report was complete, everyone finally left. Everyone except Alexander and Charlotte. The enormous conference room became silent. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Alexander finally broke. You shouldn't have looked at those photographs. Charlotte looked down. I know. His voice softened unexpectedly. They were my wife and daughter. Charlotte's heart stopped. Alexander stared out the window. The car accident happened 11 years ago. The room became painfully quiet. I was driving. Charlotte felt tears gathering in her eyes. Alexander continued. I survived. His voice cracked slightly. They didn't. Suddenly everything made sense. The walls. The distance. The obsession with work. The loneliness. Alexander wasn't protecting himself from failure. He was protecting himself from loss. And Charlotte realized something terrifying. She was falling in love with him. Because beneath the power and arrogance was a man carrying more grief than anyone should ever endure. For the first time in 11 years, Alexander Hayes had told someone the truth. Not his board of directors. Not his attorneys. Not his closest executives. Charlotte Bennett. The woman who somehow kept finding her way past every wall he had built. After their conversation in the conference room, neither of them knew how to return to normal. And perhaps neither of them wanted to. The following week brought a strange change throughout Hayes Global. People noticed Alexander was less aggressive in meetings. He listened more, interrupted less. Even his executive team seemed confused. One senior vice president actually asked if he was feeling sick. Alexander responded with a glare that immediately ended the conversation. But privately, he knew exactly what had changed. Charlotte. Every time he was about to lose his temper, he found himself remembering her words, her patience, and the way she treated people. It was irritating and strangely comforting. Meanwhile, Charlotte found herself thinking about him constantly. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, the man, the father who had lost everything, the husband who still carried invisible scars, the lonely soul who had convinced himself that love only led to pain. One evening, long after work ended, Charlotte stepped out of the building and discovered a black car waiting near the entrance. The rear window lowered. Alexander sat inside. She blinked in surprise. Mr. Hayes. His expression remained calm. Get in. Charlotte laughed. That's not suspicious at all. To her surprise, Alexander actually smiled. A real smile. Small. Brief. But genuine. Moments later, she sat beside him as the car moved through Manhattan traffic. Where are we going? You'll see. 20 minutes. Later they arrived at a small Italian restaurant, hidden on a quiet street in Brooklyn. Charlotte looked confused. This doesn't seem like your kind of place. It used to be. They entered. An elderly owner immediately recognized Alexander. His face lit up. Alex! Charlotte nearly fell over. Nobody called him Alex. Nobody. The old man embraced him warmly. For the next hour, Charlotte watched a version of Alexander she never imagined existed. Relaxed. Comfortable. Human. The restaurant owner shared stories from years ago. Stories about a young Alexander who laughed constantly. A young husband who brought flowers every Friday. A devoted father who carried his daughter on his shoulders. Charlotte listened quietly, and with every story, she fell deeper. By the time dinner ended, she was in serious trouble, because she wasn't simply attracted to Alexander anymore. She loved him. The realization terrified her, especially because she wasn't sure he felt the same. As they walked outside, rain began falling lightly. The city lights reflected across the wet streets. For several moments neither spoke. Then Alexander stopped walking. Charlotte! The sound of her name on his lips made her heart race. Yes! He looked directly into her eyes. For once, there was no billionaire mask. No CEO mask. No emotional armor. Only honesty. You make me want things I stopped wanting years ago. Charlotte couldn't breathe. The world seemed to disappear around them. The traffic, the noise, the rain, everything faded. Only Alexander remained. Slowly he stepped closer. So why are you fighting it? She whispered. A shadow crossed his face, and suddenly he looked away. There it is. Charlotte frowned. What? The problem. Her stomach tightened. Alexander took a step backward. If I let myself care about you... He stopped, unable to finish. Charlotte already understood. Loss. He was afraid of losing someone again. Afraid of loving someone again. Afraid of surviving another heartbreak. And fear was winning. The next morning, disaster arrived. Charlotte entered the office and immediately sensed something was wrong. People were staring, whispering. Several coworkers avoided eye contact. Her phone exploded with notifications. Confused, she opened one of them. Her blood turned cold. An anonymous article had been published overnight. The headline was brutal. It accused Charlotte of manipulating Alexander Hayes for money and influence. Photos of them leaving the restaurant appeared everywhere. Social media spread the story within hours. Financial blogs repeated the allegations. News outlets amplified them. The comments became vicious. Charlotte's hands shook. Someone had deliberately targeted her. And whoever it was knew exactly how to cause maximum damage. Within minutes, the board of directors demanded an emergency meeting. Several investors threatened legal action. Executives questioned her role inside the company. Everything was spiraling out of control. By noon, Charlotte sat alone in a conference room, waiting for judgment. The door opened. Alexander entered. His expression was unreadable. For several seconds, silence filled the room. Then Charlotte forced herself to speak. I swear I didn't leak anything. I know. Her eyes widened. You do. Alexander nodded. I never doubted you. For reasons she couldn't explain, tears immediately filled her eyes. Because everyone else seemed willing to believe the worst. Everyone except him. Alexander sat across from her. The person responsible isn't after you. Charlotte frowned. Then why target me? His eyes darkened. Because they're after me. The realization landed heavily between them. Someone was attacking the company. The stock manipulation. The leaks. The false articles. None of it was random. It was a coordinated plan. And Charlotte had become collateral damage. That evening, Alexander ordered a private investigation. The results arrived faster than expected. And what they uncovered shocked him. The attacks were coming from inside Hayes Global. Someone within his executive leadership team had been secretly feeding information to a competitor for months. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the name attached to it. Because the person responsible was someone Alexander had trusted for nearly a decade. Someone powerful enough to destroy both his company and his future with Charlotte. And when Alexander confronted that person, the truth revealed something even more dangerous than corporate sabotage. It revealed a secret connection to the accident that had killed his wife and daughter 11 years earlier. A secret that was about to change everything. Alexander Hayes stared at the investigation report for nearly 5 minutes without saying a word. The name on the final page felt impossible. Richard Coleman, his chief financial officer, his closest business advisor, a man who had worked beside him for 9 years, a man he had trusted with billions of dollars, a man who had stood beside him during the darkest years of his life. And according to the evidence, Richard had betrayed him. The report showed secret payments, encrypted communications, private meetings with competitors, leaked corporate information. Everything pointed to Richard, but one detail caught Alexander's attention. A detail that made his blood run cold. 11 years ago, the same year his wife and daughter died, the timeline appeared repeatedly throughout the investigation. At first it seemed unrelated. Then Alexander found a name. A transportation company, one connected to the accident. His heart nearly stopped, because he remembered it. The trucking company, whose driver had crashed into his family's vehicle. The company that had declared bankruptcy shortly afterward. The company whose records had mysteriously disappeared. And somehow Richard's name appeared in documents connected to it. Alexander immediately ordered a deeper investigation. What came back was devastating. The truck driver responsible for the accident had been working excessive illegal hours. Maintenance records had been altered. Safety violations had been hidden. Someone had covered everything up. And years ago, Richard had quietly helped facilitate the legal settlements. Not because he worked for Alexander then. Because he had financial interests connected to the company. Alexander sat alone in his office long after midnight, his hands clenched into fists. For 11 years, he had blamed himself. Every single day, every birthday, every anniversary, every sleepless night. He believed the deaths were his fault because he had been driving. Now everything felt uncertain. The next morning he confronted Richard personally. The executive conference room felt colder than usual. Richard entered calmly, confidently, as though nothing had happened, until he saw the files spread across the table. Then his expression changed. Alexander stood. For a long moment neither man spoke. Finally Richard sighed. So you know. Alexander's voice remained dangerously calm. Tell me I'm wrong. Richard looked away. I can't. The silence that followed felt explosive. 9 years. Alexander stared at him. 9 years I trusted you. Richard rubbed his forehead. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. Alexander laughed bitterly. The deaths? No. The cover-up? No. Then what exactly wasn't supposed to happen? Richard's face hardened. The investigation. For the first time Alexander understood. Richard wasn't sorry. Not truly. He was sorry he had been caught. The realization disgusted him. Why? Richard met his eyes. Because I spent my entire life watching people like you win. Alexander frowned. What does that mean? You inherited opportunity. The accusation shocked him. Alexander had built Hayes Global from almost nothing. Every sacrifice, every risk, every failure, every victory. Richard knew that. Yet years of resentment poured from him. You got everything. Richard's voice shook. The family, the success, the future. Alexander's expression darkened. My wife and daughter are dead. For a brief moment guilt flashed across Richard's face, then disappeared. Not because of me. The room became silent. Alexander suddenly realized something important. Richard wasn't a monster. He was something worse. A man who had spent years justifying terrible choices until they felt normal. And those choices had destroyed countless lives, including his own. Within hours Richard was removed from the company. Law enforcement became involved. The board backed Alexander completely. News of the betrayal spread quickly. Hayes Global stock stabilized. Investors regained confidence. The crisis appeared to be ending. But Charlotte's situation remained complicated. Public rumors continued. Online attacks persisted. And despite everything they had survived, Alexander still hadn't told her how he truly felt. A week later Charlotte sat alone beside her mother's hospital bed. The latest treatment had gone well. For the first time in months, Doctor sounded hopeful. It should have been a good day. Yet something felt missing. Her phone buzzed. A message. From Alexander. Can you meet me tonight? Her heart immediately accelerated. At sunset, she arrived at Central Park. The city glowed beneath golden evening light. Families walked nearby. Musicians performed along the pathways. Everything felt strangely peaceful. Then she saw him. Alexander stood near the lake waiting. Nervous. Actually nervous. The sight almost made her smile. As she approached, he took a deep breath. And for a moment the powerful billionaire looked like an ordinary man. A man about to risk everything. Charlotte! Hi! Several seconds passed. Neither moved. Neither looked away. Finally Alexander spoke. I spent 11 years surviving. His voice remained steady. Not living. Just surviving. Charlotte listened quietly. After the accident, I convinced myself that love was dangerous. The evening breeze moved gently across the water. I thought if I never cared deeply again, I could never be hurt again. Charlotte felt tears forming. Because she already knew where this was going. Alexander stepped closer. Then closer again. Until only a few feet separated them. And then you happened. Her breath caught. You walked into my company and turned my entire world upside down. A small laugh escaped her. Sorry about that. To her surprise, Alexander smiled. Best thing that ever happened to me. Charlotte's eyes filled completely. The words felt real. Raw. Earned. Every wall. Every fear. Every obstacle. All leading to this moment. Then Alexander reached into his pocket. Charlotte looked confused. Until she saw the small velvet box. And suddenly the world stopped. Because this was happening much sooner than she expected. Much sooner than either of them planned. Alexander opened the box slowly. But before he could say another word, a voice shouted from behind them. Charlotte! Both turned. A doctor was running toward them. Out of breath. Panic visible on his face. Charlotte's stomach dropped instantly. Because she recognized him. He worked at her mother's hospital. And the expression on his face meant only one thing. Something was terribly wrong. Charlotte's heart pounded as she rushed toward the doctor. What happened? She asked breathlessly. The doctor looked relieved to find her. Your mother is okay. Charlotte immediately exhaled. For a moment her knees nearly gave out. But she asked for you. Right now. Within minutes, Charlotte and Alexander were on their way to the hospital. The entire drive felt endless. When they finally entered the room, Charlotte's mother was awake. Tired, weak, but smiling. The sight brought tears to Charlotte's eyes. Mom! Her mother squeezed her hand gently. I scared you, didn't I? A little. The older woman glanced toward Alexander, then smiled knowingly. So that's him. Charlotte immediately blushed. Alexander, one of the most powerful men in America, suddenly looked uncomfortable. Her mother laughed softly. I've wanted to meet the man who makes my daughter smile like that. For the next hour they talked, laughed, and shared stories. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt something he thought he had lost forever. Family. A few weeks later, even better news arrived. Charlotte's mother's treatment was working. The doctors were optimistic. Her recovery would take time, but her future finally looked bright. As life slowly settled, so did the chaos surrounding Hayes Global. Richard Coleman faced criminal charges. The company's reputation recovered. Investors returned. And Alexander found himself focusing less on survival and more on living. Something Charlotte had taught him without even trying. One crisp autumn evening, Alexander invited Charlotte to the rooftop garden of Hayes Global. The city sparkled below them. Thousands of lights stretched across Manhattan. It was the same place where he often stood alone after difficult days. But tonight he wasn't alone. Charlotte stood beside him, the woman who had changed everything. Alexander turned toward her. This is where I used to come when I wanted to escape. Charlotte smiled. And now it's where I want to remember how lucky I am. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Alexander reached for her hand, then slowly lowered himself onto one knee. This time there were no interruptions, no emergencies, no unfinished conversations, only the truth. I spent years believing my story ended the day I lost my family. His voice remained steady. But then you walked into my life. Charlotte was already crying. You taught me that loving again isn't betrayal. Alexander opened the velvet box. The diamond caught the city lights. You taught me that healing is possible. A tear rolled down Charlotte's cheek. And you gave me a future I never thought I'd have. He looked directly into her eyes. Charlotte Bennett, will you marry me? The answer came before he even finished. Yes. A laugh escaped through her tears. Yes, Alexander. 1,000 times yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the city seemed to disappear around them. Nothing else mattered. Not the money. Not the company. Not the headlines. Only the two people who had found each other after years of pain and loss. 1 year later, surrounded by friends, family, and the people they loved most, Alexander and Charlotte were married. And as he watched her walk toward him, Alexander finally understood something he had spent 11 years searching for. The strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who find the courage to love again after they do. Because sometimes, the most feared man in the city doesn't need more power. Sometimes, he simply needs the right person to remind him how to live. And for Alexander Hayes, that person was Charlotte, the only woman who could tame his heart. The end.